Hello, I'm Frank Phillips. I'm interviewing Mr. Ronald Williams on behalf of the Veterans History Project for the Office of Congresswoman Donna F. Edwards and the Library of Congress. We are working in conjunction with Prince George's Community College and PGCC TV. Today's date is November 5th, 2015, and we are located in the television studios of Prince George's Community College in Largo, Maryland. Our producer and director of the project is Justin Smothers. In the room, we have Zachary Goldsmith, Robert Williams, Milan Brown, Michael Delaney, Zenesia Hall, and Dominique Thomas. This project is being coordinated by Dr. Sherelle Williams and the Mass Communication Department of Prince George's Community College. The purpose of this interview is to gain insight into the life of United States military veterans currently residing in the state of Maryland. I have known Mr. Williams for 2 years and hope to get his perspective and stories about his military experience and his life before, during, and after military service. Let's begin. Mr. Williams, how would you prefer to be addressed for this interview?
You can call me Ron, that will be just fine.
Okay, great. What I'd like to do first is start off just to get a perspective on your early biography by asking you, where were you born? What was your family composition like? And what did you do prior to entering the military?
Well, as briefly as I can put it, I was born in North Carolina, deep south. My father actually died before I was 1 year old, so I never really had a father per se, but my mom, she strong black woman, of course, and she came to the DC area for employment, and she took care of me and my brother. As far as where I was born, I don't have much recollection of that in the Carolinas, but my DC roots and Southern Maryland roots are very deep.
Okay. When did you get to come to DC?
1950 actually. I was born in 49 and I got here in 50, so I was 1 year old.
Okay. What did your parents do?
Well, actually my mother, she was a high school graduate, but she didn't have any real skills, but she learned to become a cake decorator for the Marriott Corporation and actually excelled at it to the point of a world-class cake decorator. I believe she was the first female baker in the Washington metropolitan area. She then moved over to the metro system, and at that she became the second female bus operator ever, and she was the first female in management at Metro. So, but she basically was the breadwinner for my brother and myself.
Okay. I heard you say you had a brother. Was he a younger or
He was a younger brother. He's a nice guy. He's not, I was the man of the, in my mentality anyway, the man of the family. I had to be that masculine presence. My brother's kind of a nice guy, and my mom was always working, so that left me the kind of manhood, our little family.
Did you have any other relatives that were engaged in the military?
Yes, I did. I had a cousin actually, and he was actually closer to me than my brother. He was older, and so I looked very much up to him, and he actually went the academic route, became a professor at Georgetown and UDC. He was military, he's full bird colonel. His work experience, he actually was the director of something called the Millennium Challenge Corporation. It's a corporation that gives away money to countries. He's a classmate of Bill Clinton, as a matter of fact.
Okay, great.
So he did very well for himself.
Okay, outstanding. So let me ask you, I know you talked a little bit about your early background. Let me talk more specifically about what kinds of things did you do before you entered the military, and what precipitated your...
Well, I can be frank, it's history gone, and I think it's important to share because there's a lot of it going on. We were poor, seriously poor, single mom, and so my environment dictated alcohol, drugs, robbing. That's all I was surrounded with. So I decided to become a robber. And I thought that was, at a young age, I thought that was the way out of the misery, the financial misery. It wasn't long events unfolded that made me realize that robbing was not a good occupation, and that's how I ended up going to the military.
Okay, speaking of that, I know a lot of people have entered the military with that background.
Right.
Were you drafted or did you volunteer?
A little bit of both, as strange as it sounds. I was drafted. I had a job, and I left the job, and I was drafted. But when they found out that I had an armed robbery conviction, I was ineligible for the military, so I didn't have to go. But I had had enough of the street life, and I asked them, is there any way you could let me in? And they said if I got a waiver, that they would discount my criminal record and let me in. I got the waiver, they let me in.
Okay. So let me ask you then, once you got in, I know going into the military you go through a series of training. Could you tell us about that, about leading up to your eventual going into combat?
Okay, I think I can. I want to give the perspective of a young man going in and leaving and trying to change his life, but at no time was I in touch with reality of what was actually going on. I was a mail clerk for the post office, so my thinking was I'll go into the military and be a mail clerk because that's my experience. That was not the military's idea. Their idea was for me to go into infantry. And so when I got into basic training, they were teaching us a lot of infantry type things and conditioning us for where we were going to eventually end up. And then my advanced training, which was in Columbia, South Carolina, incidentally, I was at Fort Bragg for the basic, which is in North Carolina. Yeah. But in South Carolina, they gave me a job description of anti-tank indirect fire crewman, which is a great big cannon. And I excelled at that, and I just knew that they didn't have any tanks in Vietnam. The enemy didn't anyway, so I felt pretty good about myself. And I passed that course with flying colors, and then we did some airborne training, and we had a lot of fun and all that. So I was ready, and I felt pretty secure in what I was doing.
Okay. When did you find out that you were going to go overseas to?
I kind of knew it before I got out of the indirect fire class. But again, my mindset from my perspective was I'm going over here as an anti-tank warfare crewman, but they don't have any tanks. So I felt, yeah, but I knew I was going to Vietnam.
Was your impression of Vietnam a lot different than the reality that you eventually had to face?
Very, very, very much so. What happens, in my opinion, is that I looked at a lot of war pictures, Audie Murphy, John Wayne, that type of thing. And as kids, you know, we play with guns and we get out there and shoot them up and this and that and the other. And so I was kind of like excited about the adventure. But when I got there and found out about real bullets, I wasn't so excited, you know. And so what I thought war and things were was not the reality at all.
Okay. Let me ask you, let me backtrack a little bit. I know sometimes when you go through these different types of training experiences, were you able to remember any of the people that imparted any lessons to you before you went over to Vietnam? Any of your instructors?
Actually, I do. There was one, he was a drill sergeant Sessions, and he was a really strong, tough guy, and he was regimental, and he would pull some of us to the side and talk to us, but basically he was serious as a heart attack, and nobody could figure out why. After the Vietnam experience, then you look back, you say, oh, that's why he was so serious. But the biggest impression I had was a drill sergeant, his name was Spickelmeyer. He's a little short, stocky white guy, and I was kind of like a knucklehead. So one day we were training and he actually jumped on me. And I was much bigger and I thought I could fight. But when he got done, I didn't think I could fight no more. But I had no more trouble. And in hindsight, I realized what he was doing. He was taking the biggest, toughest, seemingly toughest guy in his command and making an example out of him so that he wouldn't have any more trouble out of anybody else following his direction. Okay. Highly effective.
No doubt. Another question I wanted to ask you, leading back into your Vietnam experience, how was the transition from Washington, D.C., young man with the colorful background, coming into the military, adjusting to that lifestyle?
I had some rough situations. I had a problem. There was quite a bit of racism during the time. It's during the Martin Luther King. You're talking about 68, 69, 70. There was a lot of civil rights stuff going on, and it was even magnified in the military. So I had a hard time adjusting to saluting young officers when I felt that I was tougher and smarter than they. So consequently, I kept getting in a lot of trouble. The other thing I had a problem with was I would go home whenever I got ready. I would always come back, but hey, they didn't have barbed wire fences in penitentiaries, so I got on the bus and go home, and then I'd come back when I got ready. And I think my first year, I didn't get paid at all. I had so many of those Article 15s, they call them. They just kept taking my money, you know.
So it was quite an adjustment then.
Well, it was a serious adjustment in the discipline factor, which in hindsight, again, is necessary, because what I was undisciplined. And the slogan, the Army will make a man out of you, is very much true. You will learn discipline, or you'll be out of that system. And I conformed to the system, so I gained a great deal of discipline from that experience, yes.
Okay. You alluded that your first overseas assignment was Vietnam.
Yes.
Could you tell me about your first day in Vietnam? What was your impression? What did you do?
My first day in Vietnam was a continuation of the dream that I thought, the unreal dream. We came into a place called Cam Ranh Bay. Before we got there, we went to Wake Islands, the Philippines, Hawaii. So I'm seeing all these, and this is an inner city kid, had never seen nothing but concrete all his life. So now I'm seeing all these palm trees, blue waters, beaches. The military would give us all the beer we could drink, which I wasn't big on beer, but I drank it. Hot beer, all the food you could stand, and you're just lounging around waiting. So I thought, man, I've hit the mother lode here. This is all right. When I left Cam Ranh Bay, I found out that that was another illusion of mine, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, going into Vietnam and going to your major unit, what unit did you serve with?
I served in a very, I feel, elitist unit. It was 101st Airborne Division. We replaced the Marines who initially went into Vietnam. And there's quite a bit of history with the unit. When we were going to my unit was mostly stationed in the jungle. 90% of our time was spent in the jungle. Myself and another guy who was replacements for Charlie Company were stationed on a fire base to secure it, to pull security duty. And that was when the reality pill finally took hold.
Could you explain to us what a fire base is?
A fire base is a high ground area where military would take control of and put heavy guns, artillery, big guns that could shoot through 3, 4, 5, 10 miles all around this hill. And as the units are out doing what they're doing, if they run into some difficulty, they can call the fire base and direct the fire base's fire to wherever their problem was. So it will give you such an advantage in combat that you have these big guns that can zero in on the enemy's position, and then you're on the ground, and then you could just do what you want to do. But the fire base had to be protected because the enemy wants that fire base. Yeah. And so that was part of our job description.
On the fire base that you were on, what was the name of that fire base?
Oh, there were several. There were several. Some were more hectic than others. I want to say it was Catherine. Bear with this interview. I am a traumatic brain injured veteran, so sometimes little things will skip by, dates, times, places. But I believe it was Catherine, the first fire base before I was connected to my unit. And I remember that one so vividly, not the name, but the fire base itself, because that was the first time I got my reality check about the finality of death.
Okay.
We were attacked. And
at Catherine?
At Catherine, we were attacked.
Could you tell us a little bit about that?
I can now. I'm also a PTSD guy, and for many, many years, it was in the back compartment of my brain, but since treatment, I'm able to talk about it, so I can tell you. The young guy and I, the guy's name was Alan Gross. He's a white guy, just like me, scared to death, don't know what's going on. And at night we were talking about his background, my background, and when the attack came, and it was a heavy mortar attack, the enemy was coming up to take over and overrun the fire base in the middle of the night, about 3 o'clock at night, pitch dark. So we're defending and watching for the overrun, and the mortar round fell very near the foxhole we were in, and it hit him, but it didn't hit me. So all night long I had to sit there and listen to him tell me about how he was dying. And no one could come and help, but I couldn't help because I had to keep making sure that they didn't come in and kill both of us. Mm-hmm. So all night long I dealt with that, and when morning came, when the daylight came, the attack ceased, and they came and got him and me. That's when the page turned for me.
Okay. And when you say the page turned, what do you mean by that?
I mean, I realized that all that TV stuff that I had been watching is not what's really going on, and I decided that I don't want to play no more. And so I let them know, the higher ups, that I quit. Send me back home, whatever you're going to do. But I'm not going through this anymore. I watched him get blown apart, and I had to deal with that. I had to deal with hurting people that were trying to hurt me. And it just hit me too hard, and I just psychologically decided, no more, can't take it.
So you spent the entire night with someone that had passed away in front of you?
He hadn't passed quite away. We were talking about it. I heard his last breath. We talked about it. He was telling me he was going to die, in his own words. There's a movie, Saving Private Ryan, has a scene similar to that, and it's a tough thing. It's just a real tough thing. That you're helpless, and it's just tough. It's real tough. It's hard to explain it to someone.
Yeah. So let me ask you, how often were your engagements in these kinds of firefights? How often did your company?
I could spit out a number, but the bigger issue, I think, is that you go on what's called high alert. Your survival mechanisms, even now today, pots and pans, 4th of July, cars backfiring, you're sleeping. You never really sleep because you don't know when the attack is coming, and you always want to be ready because the prize that you're trying to make sure you win is your very existence. So you go through different combat situations, and some of them stick out, but the exact number I would not be able to put a finger on. There's no way. I can tell you certain incidences and what happened during those incidences, but there's probably a lot of incidences that escape me because it was a day's work. It's like the bus driver trying to remember what stop he stopped at. Yeah. You know.
Well, I know we alluded to a picture speaks 1,000 words, and I know to your left there's a picture of you in Vietnam.
Yes.
And could you tell me what was going through your mind, what happened that day?
I know exactly what was going through my mind. This picture was taken by the executive officer. It wasn't taken by him, but it was found by him, that wrote the chronicle of our company. And this picture is just after our company had spotted a battalion of NVA soldiers coming in. And
now, just in perspective, a battalion is about how many?
It's about 400 in the case of the Vietnamese, okay. 400 people, but some were, we call them now suicide bombers. In Vietnam, we call them sappers. And they would strap bombs to themselves, crawl through barbed wire, and run into the company command's office and detonate themselves. They were very much suicide bombers. But they were very highly trained, and they were seriously dedicated, much like ISIS and Al-Qaeda, to their cause. And we, being jungle fighters, my company commander knew the jungle very, 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 very well. And we saw them, they didn't see us. And we were not numbered enough to attack them. So what we did is we called in the artillery from the fire bases and corralled them into an area and made sure that they didn't hurt anybody else.
Okay.
Put it like that.
Okay. And what were you thinking?
I was thinking about the fact that I had just killed a lot of people. And if you look at the picture, you can almost see it in my eyes. How did I get in this position in my life? Yeah. And Colonel Wiggins and I, we laughed about that because most of us, when that kind of stuff happens, you'll look up. I imagine guys that get locked up for life in prison would say the same thing and have the same look. How did I get in this situation? Then you start thinking, well, how am I going to get out of it? And that's when, like I said, I'd already been traumatized by my buddy being killed, so I became very animalistic. I lived like an animal, I thought like an animal. It's just the way it was at that time.
Obviously, you made it out of that. Is there anything that you can attribute to your survival, leadership?
Yes, definitely leadership. My company commander, he's a chronicled guy, very much decorated. Field commission, he got his officers, he was enlisted, he did a lot of great things. But he had a leadership style that he would not send us anywhere that he wouldn't go. And even though there was serious racism all around the United States Army everywhere, we had none in Charlie Company, none, zero, zilch, none. And that kind of gave us an elitist status because everybody knew it. Even the companies that weren't close to us, they knew we had a reputation of being very much one unit all the way. And even now, when we talk to each other, the ones of us that do, that feeling is still there.
Okay. You had mentioned that that you were a traumatic brain injury victim.
Yes.
Could you talk to us about that experience?
I can, and it's funny. It's funny. It makes you very religious when stuff like this happens. I was boarding a helicopter in the jungle that was the landing zone was not blown properly, and the helicopter shifted and hit me in the head. The top blade, I had the iron pot on, but it just tore that all up, and it threw me 30, 40 feet from what I understand from my comrades. And everybody had just kind of checked me in the dead box, you know. I woke up in the hospital, and I realized I wasn't dead, and I was glad. And I never went back out into the jungle again after that. But as a matter of fact, they sent me home to convalesce.
Okay. Did you wind up going back once you're convalescing?
No.
Okay.
That's no. I did not go back because I knew what was going on. Just to elaborate, where we were, there's a place called the A Shaw Valley, yeah. And some people call it the Ho Chi Minh Trail. But most soldiers that were there, we called it the Valley of the Shadow of Death. And that name stuck. It's chronicled as the Valley of the Shadow of Death. And having been there all night long, grass as high as a man, snakes, tigers, little people with guns that's dead serious about killing you, that know the jungle, booby traps. I couldn't get back on the plane and go back there. It just wasn't in me, you know. Again, I have that post-traumatic stress disorder from the combat exposure. There's no way I could go back. I tried to get out while I was there, remember?
Yes. Okay. What did you do for recreation, you know, while in
Vietnam?
Yeah.
Recreation was not really recreation. We would go swimming in swimming holes once we, you know, had the perimeter. Some of the little nuances that we would find to make good time of it was the trading of sea rations. Sea rations are, you know, a box of food that might be 4 or 5 years old, but it was good. And some people would have beans and weenies, and some would have peaches, and we would swap them. And there wasn't a whole lot of recreation. We lived in the jungle, so we had to dig foxholes every night. You know, a foxhole big enough for a person to get in. We walked probably 15, 20 miles through triple canopy jungle, if you can imagine what that is, vines and 100-degree weather with 100, 150 pounds on your back, you know, and so Recreation, we got time back in the rear, especially when we were effective. The higher ups would send us back for 3 days, stand downs. We'd finally get a shower. Funny thing, let me mention, in the Vietnam experience where I was, I don't know what we had to smell like. We never took showers. We would go 2-3 weeks without, and I guess everybody smelled the same, so we couldn't smell it. But when we did get back, that was a recreation. That was a treat. New clothes, not new, but fresh, and the shower, and good food, and don't have to worry about, who's popping up behind the bush and stuff like that. So that's basically the only recreation that I can remember.
How did you stay in contact with anybody back in the States?
I sure did. My partner, who was my main friend in Vietnam, he's from Georgia, and he came up and visited. The medic who pulled me out of the jungle when I got hurt, we became really, really, really close, and he's since died. And then I have a childhood friend who actually met up with me in Vietnam, and we married best friends and got the same job at Metro. And so, yeah, we're in touch pretty steady.
Okay. Were you married before you went to Vietnam?
I actually was.
Okay.
It was a plan. My wife is actually the saving grace of why I'm not doing 20 to life for armed robbery. She told me that if I wanted to be with her, I had to straighten up. And so, yeah, I got married and then went away. Matter of fact, I got married on the 23rd and went in the military on the 26th.
So evidently you must have straightened up. You've been married for 50 years?
Oh, I've been married for 50 years at least. What is this, 1969 to now? Not quite 50, but really, really close.
Yes. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about when you came home.
Okay.
What types of things did you do when you went home? What was the adjustment like for you?
The adjustment was very, very difficult now that I look in hindsight, because I was due, because of my injuries and what I experienced, disability. But for 30 years, I never even thought about it. I didn't want anything to do with the military. I got a job, and it was a struggle, because my job was driving the bus, which put me in contact with a lot of people. And some of those people were hostile. Mm-hmm. And not all of them, but you're going to get 1,000 people, 20 or 30 of them going to be hostile. I don't react very well to hostility. And so for some reason or another, I was able to navigate that to the point of retirement. But I stayed very, very busy. And one of the things I stayed busy with was pocket billiards. And so that kept me mentally away from sitting around and dreaming up all this combat stuff all the time.
Okay. How did pocket billiards, pool?
Pool, yeah.
How did that, did your experience in the military in some way inform your ability to play pool, or did it help?
Without a question. What I learned in the military, and this may sound crazy, but I guess that's what PTSD is, I learned how to kill. And in competition, that's my attitude. When I play, I was a money player, so if I put up some money, I felt like you were trying to take something from my wife. And so, it's the same adrenaline. You see it in sports with some of the sports figures, Serena Williams or Tiger Woods. You'll see that same kind of mentality. And I was aggressive, but I never had that finish the job type mentality with discipline. And so I was a disciplined pool player, and I was a ferocious competitor. And so I attribute that to Zippo and my experience in Charlie Company.
Right. Zippo was your commander?
He was my commander. He's my company commander, and he was a guy. He was something special.
Okay, outstanding. So what you did, you effectively channeled some of the experiences from the war into something positive in pool.
Very well said. That's exactly what I did. I never looked at it that way, but that's exactly what happened.
Let me ask you a little bit about your experience there in pool. What types of people did you play? I mean, you were a bus driver with the Metro and a station manager with the Metro. What levels of pool did you play?
I was, in my opinion, everybody's ego, in my opinion, I was the best in the world. and I played money games with anybody. And most of the time I came out on top. At one point I had reached what would be considered legendary status, and it was my passion. Again, all of my military experience and everything was channeled into that. And so even now, as an old man, I'm still considered one of the African American greats.
Okay.
And it makes me feel good, quite naturally.
Okay. Were there other greats that you played with that we would possibly know?
If you're not a pool player, of course, pool is one of those hidden sports. You might not know them, but you might. But these are world champions. They are title holders. They are, in the African American experience, to explain it, we hid from the spotlight, because if you're in the spotlight, nobody would play you, you wouldn't make any money. But what a lot of us would do, one of my mentors especially, we would hang around the World's Championships and wait for somebody to win, and then we'd ask them to play, and we'd win all the money from them. We were better than they were, but we didn't want it publicized to that extent.
Okay, outstanding. I heard you allude to how you channeled some of that energy. What were some of the key lessons that you learned from that?
Well,
from
again, Zippo would come into play. One thing Zippo and Charlie Company and we did that other companies did not do for whatever reasons they had is every single night we dug foxholes. We never just hid behind rocks or got up under. We always were in the ground. And that's a tedious thing, to take this little shovel, fold away shovel, and to dig through whatever terrain or ground there is deep enough so that you can get chest high into the ground. And from that I learned, and from my military training, I learned that you must be ready. You must be ready, especially if something may come up. So in pool, I was always ready. I used to run 10 miles every day. You know, so I never was going to get tired, whereas other pool players, maybe they were as good as I was, but after a couple of hours, they get tired. I don't get tired. And we learned that. We had a situation on a fire base that's a very famous fire base, if you will, Ripcord. There's a movie coming out about it, where there was actually a 23 or 28-day battle, constant combat. 100-degree weather, 30,000 against 3,000, 30,000 of them. And getting tired was not an option. And not being able to continue on was not an option. So after living through that sort of thing, playing pool all day, piece of cake. I mean, if I got into, in that time, a physical altercation with somebody, they need to knock me out right now, because if they got tired, then I would win, and I win hard.
How is your experiences? I mean, your direct combat experiences, the intense combat you've experienced. How has that influenced your opinion about war?
My opinion about war, it can only, and most people that know anything about it would come to the same conclusion, I'm sure. It is the worst, the closest thing to being in hell that you could ever possibly imagine. You lose humanity. You lose the value of another person's life. You have no room to think about another person's life. You're not angry, you just don't care. You know, you just don't care. It's just like they are shoe polish and you need your shoes shine. You don't, it dehumanizes you. And my feelings about war, I think it should never, ever, 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 ever happen. But of course I believe it's a necessary evil, because it does happen. And our military, even though I hate war, I'm very much proud of our military, because the guys that go and do it, they go and do it.
Let me ask you another question. Since we're doing this interview, what types of information would you like to impart on future generations about your military experiences? What would you like to tell future future warriors, future soldiers, or future people who will enter into the military about?
Well, the military is a very good tool, stepping stone to just about anything you want to do. I attribute it, and I used to help kids get scholarships to colleges as a nonprofit president. I would say that the military is better than a college education because you're going to get real time. It's like on-the-job experience. I would tell any young person, do not worry about dying. Dying will take care of itself, and it is inevitable. I think I'm pretty much living proof that if it is not your time, you're not going anywhere. So our country is a great, great country, and we need people to do certain jobs. If that's something that you can do, then do your jobs. It's much the same as a police officer or a bus driver or an educator. If you have a job to do it to the best of your ability. You always want to ask the question, I believe, what can you do for me and what can I do for you? Well, the military can give you an experience like no other, and what you can do is make sure that our country is protected. That'd be the best thing I could tell anybody thinking about it.
Okay, I want to end with this particular question. And is there anything that that I didn't talk about that you want to add to this particular?
Actually, there is.
Okay.
And I'm a DAV member. I'm a disabled veteran. I have traumatic brain injury, PTSD, Agent Orange. I mean, I got a laundry list of things that happened to me. And I have an honorable discharge. Therefore, I am taken care of medically and compensated somewhat for the things that I went through. But there are other members that were in the jungle with me that, for whatever reasons, drug addiction, non-conforming, but they crawled through the same Agent Orange. But if they didn't get an honorable discharge, the military discards them. They don't get post-traumatic stress disorder disability payments. They don't get free medicals. They don't get housing subsidies or loan guarantees, educational benefits, simply because of the nature of their discharge. And I feel that somebody needs to speak up about that, because the nature of your discharge has no bearing on what the military subjected you to. But that's the way the system is, and it needs to be changed, because you will die from Agent Orange whether you have an honorable discharge or not. That's about the best thing I can add to that.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Ronald Williams. This has been a Veterans History Project interview for 2015. I would like to thank the officers of Donna F. Edwards, Prince George's Community College, and the Communication Department, PGCC TV, and especially Mr. Ronald Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Phillips. Thank you very much.